Hey everybody, welcome to the Riddle Will Homeschool channel. Today is the first reading in my study guide series for Plutarch's Life of Cato the Younger. So in this reading, we're going to see some examples of Cato as a young person. Plutarch writes, Cato's family derived the origin of its splendor and reputation from his great-grandfather Cato, a man who had reputation and power chief among the Romans by reason of his merit, as it has been written in his life. Cato was left an orphan, with his brother Caepio and a sister Portia. Servilia also was a sister of Cato by the same mother. All of them were brought up and lived with Livius Drusus, their mother's uncle, who was then the chief political leader, for he was most powerful speaker, and also a man of the best regulated habits, and in lofty bearing inferior to no Roman. It is said that Cato, from his childhood, both in his voice and the expression of his countenance, and even in his amusements, gave indication of a character immovable and impassive and firm in everything. His purposes displayed a strength in accomplishing his ends which was above his age. And while he was rough and stubborn towards those who attempted to flatter him, still more did he show his mastery over all who would try to terrify him by threats. He was also difficult to move to laughter, and his countenance was seldom relaxed, even into a smile. He was not quick nor prone to anger, but when he had been moved to anger, he was hard to pacify. Accordingly, when he began to learn, he was dull and slow to conceive, but when he had conceived, he held fast and remembered well. And it is generally the case that those who have a good natural capacity are more ready at recollection, but those who have a strong memory who learn with labor and trouble. For all learning is, in a manner, a branding on the mind. It appears too, that Cato's difficulty of persuasion made learning a matter of more labor to him. For learning is, in truth, a kind of passive condition, and to be easily persuaded is incident to those who have less power of resistance. It is for this reason that young men are more easily persuaded than old men, and sick persons than those who are whole, and generally, with those in whom the doubting faculty is weakest, that which is proposed meets their readiest acceptance. However, they say that Cato was obedient to his pedagogus, to teacher, and did everything that he was bid. But he would ask for the reason of everything and inquire the way. His teacher also was a good-tempered man, and was readier at a reason than at a blow. His name was Sarpedon. While Cato was still a boy, the allies of the Romans were agitating to obtain the Roman franchise, and a certain Pompedius Silo, a man of military talent and of the highest repute, and a friend of Drusus, lodged with him several days, during which he became familiar with the youths. And he said, Come now, pray your uncle on our behalf to exert himself to get the franchise for us. Now Caepio, with a smile, nodded assent. But as Cato made no answer and looked on the strangers steadily and sternly, Pompedius said, But you, young man, what reply have you for us? Can you not help the strangers with your uncle, like your brother? As Cato still would not speak, but by his silence and his expression showed that he rejected their entreaty, Pompedius took him up, and holding him through the window, as if he intended to drop him down, told him either to assent, or he would let him fall. And at the same time he assumed an angry tone, and several times he swung the boy backwards and forwards as he held him in his hands. Now, when Cato had borne all this for some time, unmoved and fearless, Pompedius, gently putting him down, said to his friends, What a blessing to Italy that he is a child. If he were a man, I do not think we should have a single vote among the people. On another occasion, when a kinsman on his birthday invited to supper other boys, Cato with them, in order to pass the time, they played in a part of the house by themselves, younger and older mixed together. And the game consisted of trials and accusations, and carrying off those who were convicted. Now, one of the boys convicted, who was of a handsome presence, being dragged off by an older boy to a chamber and shut up, called on Cato for aid. Cato, soon perceiving what was going on, came to the door, and pushing through those who were standing before it and endeavoring to stop him, took the boy out, and in a passion he went off home with him, and other boys accompanied him. Cato was so much talked of that when Sulla was preparing for exhibition, the sacred horse race called Troia, in which youths are the actors, and had got together the boys of noble youth and appointed 2 captains. The boys submitted to the one for his mother's sake, for he was the son of Metella, Sulla's wife, but the other, who was a nephew of Pompedius and named Sextus, they would not have, nor would they go through their exercise nor follow him. And on Sulla asking whom they would have, they called out, Cato. And Sextus himself gave way, and yielded the honor to Cato as his better. It happened that Sulla was an old friend of Cato's family, and sometimes he had the children brought to him, and talked with them. A kind of friendship which he showed to few by reason of the weight and state of the office and power he held. Sarpedon, considering this a great matter, both as regarded the honor and security of the youth, constantly took Cato to pay his respects to Sulla at his house, which at that time, to all outward appearance, differed not from a place of torture for criminals. So great was the number of those who were dragged there and put to the rack. Cato was at this time in his 14th year, and seeing the heads of persons who were said to be men of distinction brought out, and those who were present lamenting inwardly, he said to his pedagogus, "Why nobody killed this man?" Sarpedon replied, "Because they fear him, child, more than they hate him." "Why then," said Cato, "do you not give me a sword that I might kill him, and so free my country from slavery?" Hearing these words, and at the same time observing his eye and countenance to be filled with passion and resolve, Sarpedon was so afraid that henceforward he kept a close look and watch upon him, that he should not venture upon any desperate measure. Now when he was still a little boy, and some persons asked him whom he loved most, he replied, his brother. When he was asked whom he loved next, he gave the same answer, his brother. And so on the third question, until the questioner was tired of always getting the same answer. When he arrived at man's estate, he strengthened still more his affection to his brother. For when he was 20 years of age, he never supped. He would never went abroad, never came into the forum without Caepio. When Caepio used perfumes, Cato would not have them, and in all other respects, he was strict and frugal in his way of living. Accordingly, Caepio, who was admired for his temperance and moderation, admitted that he was indeed temperate and moderate when contrasted with others, but, said he, when I compare my life with Cato's, I seem to myself to differ not at all from Scipius, which was the name of a man notorious at that time for luxury and daintiness. Okay, so that's the reading, and now we will look at some of the discussion. So I have an accompanying study guide that goes with each of these lectures. If you're interested in looking at that, I'll put the link to it in the description section. But in the study guide, I have questions that follow each reading. And then on these videos, we'll consider the questions. So my first question in the discussion section after this reading is just, what's your favorite story from Cato's childhood? And why is it your favorite? So like I told you in the introduction, oh, by the way, I'll link the introduction to the Cato series right up there. But as I told you in the introduction, Cato the Younger is possibly my favorite of all Plutarch's lives. I like them all. I love Plutarch. I love all these lives, but Cato is such an exceptional person that, in many ways, I want to be Cato when I grow up. So he's a very admirable, good person. And we get a lot of insights into his character here from his childhood. So I was just curious, I want you to think about which of those stories just strikes your imagination the most. Like, which one do you think is the most interesting, or whatever, which is your favorite? And also why. So I'll tell you mine. But first I'll tell you when I get there. But I'm going to kind of go through the setup here that Plutarch gives us. And then when we get to it, I'll tell you. But first I wanted to point out, if you were wondering why it's Cato the Younger, like who's the other person that he's younger than? Plutarch tells you right up front here. He says, Cato's family derived the origin of its splendor and reputation from his great-grandfather, Cato. So that's the elder Cato. This is Cato the Younger. And Plutarch also did a life of the elder Cato as well, which is what he refers to when he says, as it has been written in his life. So if you're wondering why it's called Cato the Younger, that's the reason. One interesting thing about Cato that we learn is that he was an orphan. It says Cato was left an orphan with his brother Caepio and a sister Portia, and then this sister Servilia by the same mother. So he was an orphan. That's an interesting circumstance that no doubt heavily influenced his life. And one of the things you see from this is in his attachment to, how attached he is to Caepio, his brother, which this is one of the stories that we talked about there. It says when he was still a little boy and some person asked him whom he loved the most, he replied, his brother. And then the guy says, oh, okay, cool, Caepio. So, and who do you love next? Well, then he says, Caepio. And the guy's like, oh, okay. So you really like Caepio. Well, then who's third? Caepio. So anyway, I think this is Cato's way of saying he really loves Caepio, and he really does. This is very touching. You can see later on in his life how this love that he has for Caepio is displayed. But anyway, I thought that was really touching and a cute kind of way. So that explains why he's so attached to Caepio, but also this is, I think, worth noting. His mother's uncle, Livius Drusus, the one who was in charge of bringing them up, was a chief political leader, most powerful speaker, and a man of the best regulated habits. What that means is he was a very disciplined individual. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't. To be regulated is to be, disciplined and to set yourself under rules, and so that had to have had an influence on Cato's development. He must have seen that and admired that quality in his uncle. So, well, their mother's uncle, Livius Drusus. So you get some just sort of abstract, without the stories that go with it, but Plutarch tells us just some abstract qualities, like says he was immovable and impassive, firm in everything. So once he set his mind on something, he wouldn't be swayed except by a powerful reason and argument. He could not be tempted or intimidated into moving from his position. And I thought this was also really telling. It's a sort of emphasizes that part of his character. It's not just that he's stubborn. It's that once he really thinks something through and he says, okay, then this is the correct way to think about it, he's not going to move. It doesn't matter if you threaten him. It doesn't matter if you tempt him with something. He's not moving, period, unless you can persuade him with reason. And that's what this means down here. It says, they say that. So first of all, he says he was kind of slow to learn, but Plutarch describes this as the reason is he thinks through everything so carefully that, that's the reason it took him so long to get something down. But once he got it down, it was down. And then it says, however, they say that Cato was obedient to his teacher, and he did everything that he was bid. So even though he was kind of skeptical of things at first, he had to know the reason, and he was slow to learn, this didn't affect the virtue of his obedience to the teacher. And it sounds like this teacher was also a really good teacher, because it says his teacher was a good-tempered man. He was readier at a reason than a blow. His name was Sarpedon. So in this case, in the ancient world and in the Middle Ages, and most of the time, teachers, it was just common for them to beat their students, not just for discipline problems, but for not getting the right answer. So, thankfully we don't do that anymore. But back then people did that commonly. Well, this one wasn't like that. He was readier at a reason. Like, he would explain why something was the way it was, rather than to beat Cato and say, this is the way it is, learn it. So So that's a pretty cool Charlotte Mason-y kind of thing to do, I thought. But this is, Cato, another part of Cato's personality comes out right here. It says, Cato did everything he was bid, but he would ask for the reason of everything and inquire the why. So he didn't just learn things just by rote memory and it's over, I've done it, I learned it. He wanted to know right down to the root why a thing was true or, what was going on, which I admire. I think that's a really cool quality of his. And it explains his justification for being so anchored to a position once he arrived at it. But now we come to my favorite story from his childhood. So if I were answering this question, I would, I guess we're kind of also answering this other question. How would you describe Cato's personality as a child? So we're answering that one as well, sort of at the same time. But this is my favorite story from his childhood when the Pompedius Silo comes to his house. When he was still a boy, the allies of the Romans were agitating to obtain the Roman franchise, and a certain Pompedius Silo lodged for several days with them. And then, so he's asking Caepio and Cato to put in a good word for them with their uncle. And so he says, hey, young men, would you please tell your uncle, to go along with what we're asking for? And it says, Caepio, bless his heart, Caepio with a smile nodded assent, like, okay, I will. But Cato, who wasn't obviously convinced that what they were requesting was justified, he Cato, let's see. Cato made no answer and looked on the strangers steadily and sternly. And then Pompedius said, but you, young man, what reply have you for us? Can you not help the strangers with your uncle like your brother? And Cato still wouldn't speak, but he clearly wasn't going to help. So this guy, Pompedius Silo, grabs him and holds him out the window and just shaking him back and forth, saying, are you sure you want to help us? And I wish I could have a video of this moment because Cato apparently is unfazed. I think this is just a clear example of his personality. The threat to his life, to his safety is irrelevant. He doesn't think it's right to do, and so he's not going to do it. And this guy shakes him out the window a little bit, threatening to drop him, talking to him, angrily. And finally, he just brings him in and sets him down and is like, good gracious, I'm glad this is just a child because otherwise he would be, indomitable, unstoppable. He's already indomitable, but as a grown man, he would have more power to go with this courage and conviction that he shows even as a child. So that's really cool to me. I really like that particular story. And these other two stories, you get to see how he was a natural leader. And I think the thing that makes him a natural leader is not that he has a passion for leading people, but that it's this same quality of, I'm going to do what's right, and I do not care what the consequences are. Because that's a rare quality, and when people see it, they follow it. And that's, even as children, they see him doing this. So he's coming to the rescue of this kid, who's playing this game. I don't know if this game was turning into something that was a little scarier than just a game or what. But anyway, this one boy was going to be shut up into this upper chamber. I don't know if the older boys are getting rougher. It seems to be implied that there's older and younger children playing together, and in this particular occasion, the older ones were maybe being too rough or scaring the younger ones. And Cato comes up and saves this. Says dragged off by an older boy, and Cato just comes up and snatches him out, and then leads off other boys accompanying him. So that's one example. The other stories about him have to do with his encounters with Sulla. Now, I have included in the back of this study guide, there's a couple of short lists. So one of the lists is the important names in the story that you might not be familiar with. And the other list is a glossary of Roman government offices. So you can check like edile and consul. You might not know what these things are. You can go back here and look if you want to. But Sulla might not be someone that you're familiar with. So you can go here, look under S, and there's Sulla. This is the entry I have. Sulla was a famous Roman general and the great rival of Marius. I've also got an entry from Marius there. Unfortunately, like Marius, he was a cruel, unprincipled tyrant consumed by selfishness and vice. His reign followed that of Marius and was similarly characterized by terror and murder. So Sulla is a murderous tyrant. And he and Marius had fought a civil war in the generation just prior to Cato's. So Cato, his generation, is going to fight a war. Cato and Julius Caesar are going to be involved in a war, fighting each other in that generation's civil war. But just prior to this, Marius and Sulla had fought a civil war. And Sulla, at this point, is the one that's ruling Rome. And he's just a murderous tyrant. Obviously, from the story, you can tell that. But the family of Cato, by good fortune, was friends with Sulla. So Cato had the opportunity to go visit the house of Sulla all the time. But Cato, this would be like my second favorite, just because, not because of anything in particular, but because it shows, again, Cato's complete disregard for his own safety. If he thinks something is right to do, he's going to do it. In this particular case, when he goes up there and he's saying, who is this guy that's beheading people, and he's so cruel and evil and running the country, why doesn't somebody kill him? To him, that's just the straight, obvious answer. And then the answer is, well, everybody's scared of him. They're more scared of him than they hate him. And then Cato says, well, then why not give me a sword? He's 14 now. And then he will go fight this tyrant and kill him. So again, this is another insight into Cato's mind. He has if he thinks it's the right thing to do, then he completely masters whatever fear he might have, and he does it. And this so frightened Sarpedon, he saw in Cato's face that he would do it. We used to have a friend of mine had this saying where he would say, so-and-so will say he'll do it, and so-and-so will say he'll do it, but so-and-so will do it. Like, you just fill in the blank with whoever it is. Well, Cato will do it, and it's not a bluff, and Sarpedon could see that, so after that he was really careful with him. So anyway, you in this reading, you get a lot of insights into what Cato was like as a child. And all of these things set the stage for the way he's going to be as an adult. I think Plutarch has picked them because they all represent they're good examples of the kind of resolve and courage and devotion to justice that he had as a grown-up. So hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.